tuned for the Joan Quinn Profiles. As an editor for Andy Warhol's Interview, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, LA Style, and Detour magazines, Joan covered the social set, the Hollywood hotshots, the international art scene, the mysteries of food, the excitement of travel, and the fabulous world of fashion. Joan continues to find creative people on the cutting edge who make things happen. Here's Joan Agajanian Quinn.
Welcome to the Joan Quinn Profiles. I'm Joan Quinn. Waiting to be profiled is composer Giorgio Moroder and sculptor Frederick Eversley. Fred was born in Brooklyn and now lives in Venice and in New York. He's shown his work in galleries and museums all over the world since 1969. Fred Eversley's work deals with space, time, and matter. Let's take each one of these, Fred, and see how they apply to your work.
The space, time, and matter is almost like a West Coast definition. I don't think very much in terms of either space, time, or matter. I really think about energy. And energy really is a compendium of all three of them. And my work really deals primarily with energy concepts, particularly the concentration of energy. Energy in a very broad sense of the word, both physical and metaphysical. And that encompasses both space and time and matter. I mean, it's...
You come from a different kind of background than most sculptors, and because of your degree in
electronic engineering.
You came to California to do electronic engineering, to work
in
in
that. I came to California for 6 months originally on my way to med school to work for Wiley Laboratories on the Apollo program and ended up being director of testing on the Apollo program. And I did it for 3.5 years and retired at the old age of 25.
Were you thinking of being a sculptor at that time? Or obviously not if you were going to med school.
No, I was not thinking about being a sculptor. Previous to that, I had studied dance and acting.
Well, when did the art part come into this? Not to say dancing is not art, because I think it's great.
The art really came literally when I left engineering. I was very close to the Venice art community while I was an engineer. I was living in Venice. I was living with a sculptoress. That's a very funny story, but I ended up physically making most of her master's show because she was incapable of ever finishing a piece of sculpture.
And what were you working? What material were you working in then?
In those days, well, she was working in wood.
She was
working in wood.
So you worked in wood as well.
Well, I helped her. I didn't work in wood. I just helped her in the evenings. And I started art as doing photography.
Oh, I see.
And I got into plastic as a means of encapsulating photographs in plastic to make photographic sculpture. And very quickly, the original idea of encapsulating photographs in plastic gave way to just pure use of plastic.
Oh, I see.
And I started with very small pieces, and it got a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger, and I sold a few pieces, and I got into a few little shows. And before I knew it, I was a plastic sculptor.
I see. Are these pieces on the set plastic?
These are both polyester pieces, cast polyester. They're both two-color cast polyester
and
pieces.
And what's the difference in that material?
The difference, polyester is just one of many families of plastic.
I see.
I work both in polyester, and the laminated pieces are in an acrylic. The more recent pieces
are these poured pieces?
These are poured pieces. These are two-layer, two-color, two-pouring pieces.
And is it damaging to your health? Is there fumes that go on with this? I mean, I'm worried about that, and also the environment with these kind of things.
Right. Well, the damage to the environment from the small amount of fumes coming from a very small piece of plastic is relatively minimal. It can be dangerous to your health if you don't take proper precautions. I do take the precautions. I do wear masks. I do have good ventilation.
I see.
But as a real point in fact, The fumes given off by this are actually less hazardous to your health than turpentine used in oil painting.
I see. I think artists have a real problem anyway, because I don't think they've ever recognized that these fumes and these environmentally damaging materials they're using are affecting them as well.
It's absolutely true. I mean, I've given several lectures at universities, many lectures at universities regarding this subject. Luckily, since I had an engineering background, and planned to go to med school, I know a lot about industrial toxicology.
That's what I would think.
But most artists don't. And I have seen some, particularly in university settings, some absolute horror stories. You wonder why the people aren't dead.
I think it's fabulous that you've taken the time to lecture about it and to bring it into the forefront, because unless we start hearing about it, we're not going to know. We're not going to be careful about it. Tell us a little bit. Both of these pieces are so fabulous. Which one should we start with? Which one's the older of the two?
Actually, these are both from the last series I've done, so they're both the same age, I mean, essentially. This piece is a parabolic lens. Mm-hmm. It's a perfect parabola, and as such, it's the perfect concentrator of energy, the parabola being the shape that is the perfect concentrator of energy. The piece has certain optical properties, but the acoustical properties of the piece are identical to the optical properties. And indeed, if there are some forms of metaphysical energy, ostensibly the piece would treat those forms of metaphysical energy the same way as treating the light energy or the sound energy, since all energy is basically the same.
You talked about the sound energy. How does it conduct sound?
No, it has a focal point exactly right here.
In the center.
In the center, about this far away from the piece. Uh-huh. And if you put your ear exactly right here, either on purpose or by accident, you'll hear every single sound like a gigantic parabolic reflector.
Is that right?
Yes, like a radar antenna.
Do most of your pieces encompass both of those elements?
Well, an awful lot of my pieces encompass the parabolic shape, yes. Even this piece, this inner surface is a section of a parabola. But this piece also physically moves. I mean, you actually have physical movement.
You scared me.
As well as, the kinetic movement from the apparent way it's reacting to the light.
Is this a laminated piece?
No, it's cast.
Neither one of them. They're not cast and then laminated.
No,
the color comes
with it's sort of like making multiple layer Jell-O.
Is that right? So does it take time?
It takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of difficulty in multiple layer casting because each layer has to be perfect. Mm-hmm. And my very earliest pieces were 3-color pieces, 3 colors and 3 layer. And then I went to monochromatic pieces, and now I'm working with multiple layer pieces again, which are much more difficult, but yield an effect that you can't do in any other way that I'm aware of.
I think they look really beautiful, and they look beautiful here. In 1972, you received a National Endowment of the Arts Individual Artist Award. What kind of work were you doing then, and what did that award mean to you?
Well, actually, that was a very interesting situation. That was the first year of the NEA Awards.
For individual artists?
For individual artists. It was, in those days, there was nothing to apply for. You were nominated by some anonymous group of people and were awarded and got a phone call and not saying, will you accept it? Mm-hmm.
So they had seen your work, obviously, and
they knew
they knew your work.
I had a one-man show at the Whitney Museum in 1970 and several one-man show at OK Harris in 1971 and show in Chicago and such. So my work was fairly well known, particularly on the East Coast. And my God, I forgot her name. It'll come to me in a second. The head of the National Endowment of the Arts herself was the one who called me, which is incredible. Nancy Hanks, my God, how could I forget
Hanks.
that? It's been so many years. Nancy Hanks called me herself and introduced herself on the phone and said, would I be willing to accept the National Endowment for the Arts Award? And I said, what is the National Endowment for the Arts Award? And she explained that it was in those days $7,500. And I said, I would be very happy to accept the National Endowment for the Arts Award. And indeed, it gave me, in those days, $7,500, went quite a long way, and enabled me to buy quite a bit of new equipment as opposed to the homemade things I sort of was using at the time, and a couple months of freedom, and allowed me to go beyond this size to much bigger pieces.
So it did help you.
Absolutely.
And it did build a foundation because by 1977, here you are, artist in residence at the Smithsonian.
Right.
Now, what is that? Were you the first person?
I was the
think
first
you
and
were.
only.
Oh, the first and only. That was such an interesting program because at that time I had a card from you that read Frederick Eversley, Venice, and Washington, D.C. Everyone else lived in New York, and here you were in Washington.
It was one of those curious kinds of programs. It actually started out. The Smithsonian historically has always had poets in residence, scholars in residence, art historians in residence, astronomers in residence, geologists in residence, but they never had an artist in residence.
But it was a long period. It was 3 years.
It was 3 years. It was an initial 1-year appointment with 2 years of extension. And I, for the first 2.5 years, was put up in a 22-room government mansion called Barney House, which is now a museum open to the public. And it was between the Turkish and Korean embassies. I was guarded by the Secret Service. I had a government maid and government car, and a very large basement, and a very large studio in the basement of the National Air and Space Museum.
Wow. And you were there making your work?
I was there making my work with great difficulty because I could not cast pieces, and this is the only thing I'd ever done, because by accident, a typical government kind of story, they built this wonderful studio to my specifications, and they included a ventilation system as I was requested. And unfortunately, they connected the ventilation system to the central ventilation system for the entire National Aerospace Museum. So if I had made any fumes, I would fumigate 10,000 people a day.
Just what we were talking about. I never knew this would end up in this thing.
And that is
wow.
when I had to radically change my work. I had to find something that was already precast, pre-done, that made no fumes. And that's when I started working with acrylic.
Do we have any of those here?
None of the early pieces, but
Just show me one.
This is an acrylic piece. It's a laminated acrylic piece. It's composed of about 120 identical acrylic right triangles laminated together to form a curvilinear spiral shape.
I'm going to go through these very quickly because we don't have very much time. But talk about this piece right here very quickly.
This is actually my very last project. It's not a project yet, it's an attempted project. And basically, I have been in 2 large competitions for doing Martin Luther King memorials, neither one of which I've gotten. In both cases, the community has decided they essentially wanted a Black Mount Rushmore type of monument, not an abstract monument after all.
Oh, I see.
But basically, what this is a large sphere. This is supposed to be 8 feet in diameter. This is actually shown as being black marble, but it also could be transparent, a perfect sphere. The sphere actually floats in a water bearing. So even though it weighs several tons, it's actually literally floating on a bed of water. And since it's floating, you can turn it the several tons with your pinky.
Oh, wow.
And the sphere acts as a computer trackball, essentially. And as you rotate the sphere, the computer senses the location of the sphere, and depending on the location of the sphere controls a computer that contains multimedia equipment, in the case of Martin Luther King, containing 8 hours of audio-visual material I had collected regarding the life of Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
That was to be disseminated around the site on monitors and speakers.
Well, maybe we'll get that done for you. Maybe people will see that today and they'll get it done. We don't have much time, so very quickly tell us just this.
That piece and its mate, no, its mate, here, let me get it for you, is a piece that is,
sorry.
This and this are the
I
same
see.
piece. And what it is, it's the laminated pieces, similar to the laminated acrylic pieces that I showed, the hanging piece. But this is actually alternating layers of steel and acrylic. So from one angle it is opaque, From the other angle is 3/4 transparent, and each of the transparent acrylic elements acts as a prism. So it's 120 prisms, each at a different angle, which each one creating a rainbow cast upon the surface.
Well, you've created a rainbow for us today.
Thank you.
Oh, you've been so wonderful. And you've brought us so many things that we haven't been able to know about before. So thanks, Fred Eversley, for being with us.
You're quite welcome.
And don't go away, because Giorgio Moroder will be right on the set with us. Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and we're back with composer, songwriter, producer Giorgio Moroder. You know, Giorgio owns 3 Oscars, and one of them was for this. Do you remember this exciting song? You're going to see it now.
But a slow glowing dream that your fear seems to hide deep inside your mind. All alone I have cried silent tears full of pride in a world made of steel, made of stone. What a feeling, keeps believing. I can't have it all now, dancing for my life. Take your passion and make it happen. Pictures come on.
Giorgio Moroder received an Academy Award for Best Original Score for Midnight Express in 1979, Best Original Song for Flashdance, which you just saw, What a Feeling, in 1982, and the multi-platinum Berlin recording of his Top Gun best song, Take My Breath Away, in 1986. He doesn't have room on his shelves for all the awards. Golden Globes, Grammys, Film Critics, DJ Music Awards, and on and on. Giorgio was born in Italy and started playing stand-up bass and guitar in his teens. By age 19, he left his architectural studies to tour Europe with several music groups. Giorgio, you finally made it to Munich, and that seems where everything started.
In fact, in the mid-70s, I was in Munich, and I discovered Donna Summer.
Was that your big break?
That was my big break. I had some #1 songs in England and some in Europe.
Oh, you did before that?
Yeah, but worldwide, Donna Summer with Love to Love You Baby was my first #1.
Well, what were you doing in Munich? Why did you go to Munich?
Well, I live in the northern part of Italy, and Munich is the biggest city close to Ortisei. It's about 2.5 hours drive, and so it's a pure geographical coincidence.
And then, do you speak German?
I speak German.
You speak 6 languages, I know.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean,
well,
were you speaking German in Italy because
in Italy,
of the closeness?
Yeah, in Italy, in the valley where I come from, we speak Italian, German, and Ladino, which is a local. It's like they speak it in Switzerland and parts of Italy.
Oh, I see. So it's like a language we wouldn't recognize, Ladino.
No, it's based on it's a cross between Italian and French. It's a Latin Roman language.
Well, did you go to Munich to live and to produce records, or did you just go to Munich to...
Yeah, I was commuting between Italy and Munich and working there because obviously in Italy, in the little town where I come from, it's a beautiful town in the Dolomites, in the Alps, but working-wise, it's very difficult. You need musicians, studio, and so you have to be in a city.
And you already knew you were going to be in music and not architecture by that time.
Yeah, at 19, I decided I want to be in the music.
You know, the funny thing is, I've talked to so many Italians in the arts, and they all seem to start with architectural school. I don't know why. Is there some kind of background, or?
Maybe the word Rinascimento, which is Renaissance, which started in Italy, maybe it's spilled over up to the Alps.
You have to have that. It
Right.
has to be in your background.
Right.
Well, when you discovered Donna Summer, that was the beginning of the disco craze, wasn't it?
Right, that song was about 17 minutes song, and it became such a big hit, and that's what made me not move yet, but look for America.
How long did that disco craze last, and how involved were you in it?
Well, I did all the songs of Donna, all the albums until 82, I think 83.
Oh, you did. So you
Yeah.
worked with her a lot. Did you
Oh, I
write
did.
them or just produce
Yeah,
them?
I did. I wrote most of the songs, and I produced all and wrote most. The one with Barbara Streisand, and on Enough Is Enough, and some for the movies. I produced her Academy song, Last Dance, and so I did some other dance groups, and until 82, 83, that's when the word disco, the dance, kind
That-
of faded away.
It was starting to die. Did you know it was starting to die? Because it lasted how long? Say 10 years, something like that?
Yeah. We noticed that the last album, at least the last I did with Donna, didn't do as well as the previous one, the Bad Girls album. But the thing is, the word disco changed, but the dance thing was still on. They were calling it dance, so it didn't really die. It changed name actually.
I see. But you were aware of what was going on, and it was.
Yeah. We tried then to have put a little more rock and roll, more rock in Donna's recording, but then she changed the record company, and then I didn't produce her anymore.
Well, the thing was, right about that time, 82, is when you wrote Flashdance, which was a huge success, and it seemed like, as you say, you kept the word dance in it. It became
Right.
more athletic. It became different more of the time, I guess.
Right, and especially that movie made an incredible impact, not only with the music, but the way the girls were dressing and the dancing.
But that all had to do with fitness. We were talking about fitness
right,
then, and
right,
keeping in
right,
shape.
right.
It was the beginning,
Yeah,
really.
and with the fitness, the only really music they play is dance music, is disco kind
Right.
of. And of course now we have the big revival of disco.
Do you think that's what I was going to ask you? Do you feel it's coming back now?
Oh, I know it's coming back, because if you hear, especially in Europe, if you hear all the hits right now in Europe, are all, they call it dance, but it's disco, and played with the same instruments which we had then, the same kind of feel.
I was going to ask you, what kind of instruments made that disco beat?
Partially, of course, drums. That's the main thing. But partially, the synthesizer with that pulsing beat, that bass, which gave that driving thing.
The under?
The under, yeah. That, and of course the bass drum. But then the style changed a little bit. But for the last 2-3 years, all those old sounds came back. And in fact, you have to have the old synthesizers to get those sounds.
Well, you did. Weren't you playing a Moog synthesizer at one time?
The Moog was my first big, incredible monster.
Do people know about that now? Do they know what that is?
No, yes, the word Moog is still known, but this monster was like 7-8 feet wide.
Oh, it was?
Now they have the same thing in a little package of 19-inch.
But does it get the same sound? Does it do the same thing?
Yes. Well, the first Moog was kind of experimental. Then it became much better. But to get those sounds, you have to have the old instruments, and not only Moog.
And when you were composing them, what were you composing on what kind of instrument?
On keyboard.
Oh, so
on
you could do
keyboard,
that.
like strings or piano, and always recording on tape.
And it is Flashdance or the disco album or whatever it was. Is that what brought you to America?
Well, what brought me was Donna, actually, because with the #1 song here, she wanted to come back to the States. She's American, of course. She used to live in Munich. And so I was here for a few months at the time and starting to work a little bit. And then in '80, I definitely decided to move and I came here.
Oh, you did? So
Yeah.
and then were you writing songs when you came here as well?
Yeah, from '80 on, I was in the studio
And
day and night.
Where is the studio?
Well, first I had one in my house in Beverly Hills. Then I bought a studio in the Valley in Lancashire.
Oh.
And that became a little too much of an operation. I had 3 rooms and a lot of overhead. And so I sold that one and now I have a little home studio.
Oh, you're back to the home.
Yeah.
So it's come full circle. Disco, through the films, now back to disco again. Are you writing that same kind of music?
No, I
You
try to
do?
stay out because I did it so often and I think I did it quite well and I don't want to go back.
Would you rather write or produce?
I think the producing is a little easier than write because produce, you have the song, you know who is going to do it, you have to worry about the arrangement. To create a song, to compose, that's tough because that's mentally, you have to sit down and sometimes you get an idea in an hour, sometimes you don't get any idea in a whole day, so it's tougher.
When you compose, do you ever collaborate?
Not as a composer. I usually write the song and I just make up some lyrics. I sing it and make up some lyrics. Just
So
whatever. And then I have my lyricists like Pete Bellotti started the first, he was my first one. Then Tom Whitlock did all the Top Gun songs and the rest.
Do you have a say-so in the lyrics?
Yeah,
in
but
a way, or do
basically,
they just come in and write the lyrics?
basically, I like to know, and I have to like the title. Then the lyrics, that's then
There
the
you go.
job of the guys.
I see. Well, before we leave, I want to just tell our audience that you produced Barbra Streisand, David Bowie, Cher, Roger Daltrey, Kenny Loggins, just to name a few.
Right.
And so when you say it's easier, you're dealing with pretty big people here.
Oh, they're all very professional, all nice. In fact, my dream just came true. I was always asked, what singer would you like really to work? What's your dream? And I said Elton John. And in fact, I just produced him a few months ago, and the song is doing really well. So
Great.
I don't have any dreams anymore.
Great. Well, our dream was to have Giorgio Moroder on with us today, and we thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Joan.
Thanks very much, and thanks for writing. Keep writing to 520 South Grand, 8th floor in Los Angeles. You'll see it at the end of the show. And we'll see you next time on the Joan Quinn Profiles.